There is a version of you that has already lost, not because life was unfair or because opportunity never arrived, but because every time a small decision appeared, someone else quietly voted on their behalf. That someone else wasn't another person. It was the present version of you. The strange part is that almost nobody intends to sabotage their future. They simply underestimate how often they're negotiating against it. Every skipped workout, delayed assignment, unnecessary purchase, or postponed conversation feels too small to matter. Yet years later, the future self inherits every one of those negotiations without ever having been invited to the table. That's the tragedy. Your future self pays, invoices your present self never notices. Economists have a name for part of this problem: temporal discounting. Humans naturally value immediate rewards more than future ones, even when waiting would clearly produce a better outcome. Offer someone $50 today or $60 next month, and many choose today. The difference isn't just about money, it's how we evaluate almost everything. Sleeping an extra hour feels real. Better health next year feels abstract. Buying something today produces excitement. Financial security, decades later, exists only as an idea. The future keeps losing because the present always has a louder voice, but something even stranger happens. Think about how carefully you treat something borrowed from a friend. You'd probably avoid scratching it, losing it, or damaging it because someone else will eventually receive it back. Yet your future self is, in many ways, another person. Studies have found that people often think about their future selves almost like strangers. Brain imaging research even suggests that imagining yourself decades from now activates patterns surprisingly similar to thinking about someone else. If tomorrow's version of you feels psychologically distant, sacrificing them becomes surprisingly easy. It's difficult to protect someone you barely feel connected to. That's why small daily decisions rarely feel dramatic. Nobody wakes up planning to become unhealthy, financially stressed, or full of regrets. Instead, each decision quietly borrows a little more from someone they'll eventually become. Missing one study session doesn't create failure. Buying one unnecessary item doesn't create debt. Avoiding one difficult conversation doesn't destroy a relationship. The problem is that these aren't isolated events. They're recurring transactions, each one transferring tiny costs into a future account. Picture a relay race where each runner passes the baton to the next. Now imagine the first runner intentionally making every baton heavier before handing it over. The extra weight is almost unnoticeable at first, but after enough exchanges, the final runner isn't competing anymore. They're simply trying to survive the burden created long before they entered the race. That's what life often becomes. Every version of yourself hands something to the next. Sometimes it's skills, savings, confidence, friendships, and habits. Other times it's stress, unfinished work, declining health, and avoidable problems. Either way, something is always being passed forward. History offers a fascinating contrast. Builders of medieval cathedrals often spent decades, sometimes entire lifetimes, constructing buildings they knew they would never see completed. Trees were planted, knowing future generations would enjoy the shade. Libraries were funded by people who would never read the books added after their deaths. Their decisions weren't driven by immediate rewards. They identified with people who hadn't even been born yet. Somewhere along the way, many of us became remarkably good at planning for next weekend, while becoming remarkably bad at planning for the next decade. The irony is that your future self isn't asking for extraordinary sacrifice. They don't need perfection. They simply benefit whenever today's decisions stop treating tomorrow like an unlimited storage room for consequences. A 20-minute walk isn't valuable because it's difficult. It's valuable because it quietly shifts weight away from someone you'll eventually become. Saving a small amount of money isn't impressive because of the amount itself. It's powerful because it's one less burden passed forward. Finishing an unpleasant task today isn't about productivity. It's about refusing to leave unfinished business for a version of yourself that already has enough to handle. Perhaps the most useful question isn't, what do I feel like doing right now? It's, what kind of inheritance am I leaving the next version of myself? Because whether you notice it or not, you're constantly writing someone else's biography. The future isn't built when some magical, disciplined version of you finally arrives. It is assembled quietly by today's ordinary decisions, one after another, long before anyone calls them a future.